Good day. I'm Monica Scalia from College of Arts and Sciences under the Psychology Department, and I'll be discussing Chapter 3 and Chapter 4 of the subject Understanding SF. So first, let's have the introduction. So culture is a word I know we all encountered since we can remember, as it plays a crucial role in our social lives and not only shapes our social relationship, but decides how we make sense of the world, our place in it, and our everyday action. Culture is like a benchmark. It decides what can and you cannot do. And culture is in every society. It is demonstrated in our different ways. It includes our tradition, ways, and practices. Our massive celebration of events such as graduation, family reunion, and faith is a precedent of culture. Our ways of communicating also, our ways of communicating and sharing experiences is also exemplar. Meaning, and as observed, we Filipinos are very expressive. We use physical touch, gestures, and celebration as a sign of one's success or proudness. It is our ideas, costumes, and behavior done as one. It's like dancing in one music. Everything is rhythmic and in precision. But do you remember when did you actually start practicing one, or the explanation why do we have one, and when the culture starts and end? For example, pag may nahulog na utensils, kutsara or tinidor, habang kumakain tayo, nagliligpit, di ba ang conclusion lagi ay may dadating na tao. And may gender pa yan. Pag kutsara, babae, pag tinidor, lalaki. Does anyone raise an eyebrow in this belief and start questioning the accuracy of the superstitious belief? I bet no one, because we follow such tradition without hesitation. So the focal point of this chapter is the different representation of the self across discipline, perspective, and cultural influences. Furthermore, it includes adaptation and cultural. Furthermore, it's adaptation and cultural changes and social processes. For learning outcomes, we first compare and contrast how the self has been represented across a different discipline and perspective, demonstrate critical and reflective thought in analyzing the development of oneself and identity by developing a theory of the self. So let's go to the lesson proper. So culture, as defined by sociologists, are consists of the values, system of language, communication, and practices that people share in common and that can be used to define them as collective. That means done by people acting as a group. So like my example a while ago, superstitious belief. Almost everyone follow and know this. Here in the Philippines and as a Filipino, we are big on tradition and different cultural aspects such as celebrating festas or feast. We also believe in legends, folklore, myth, popularly the aswang and encanto. As you see in social media or in media exposure, di ba sa KMJS, pag may segment about aswang and encanto, we're still very hooked and fascinated kahit na andito tayo sa modern era. Another would be kissing the hands of our elderly, and for also being known as family oriented, and we have a substantial regards and superstitious belief. So while we are on the subject, aside from the two that I gave, do you have any that you want to share? So also stated that this tradition are performed by us, can we say that it is uniquely our own? That these distinctive characteristics are purely and limited to us. Some may agree and others disagree, particularly because we all know we had been ruled by three different colonizers, and evidently we adapt to their customs and practices. But on the other hand, we also develop our own sense of self and culture in recognizing our involvement and past experiences. So before culture, of course, we are human. So anthropology is the study of what makes us human. So it takes a broad approach to understand the main aspect of human experiences and the human evolution, by which is the lengthy process of change that originated from ape-like ancestors and eventually evolved from where we are now. So as we can see on the picture, dati tayo ay maliit lang, balbon, meron tayong features similarly sa mga apes. Pero as year pass by, we can almost certainly agree that the way we imagine, the problem-solving skills that we have right now, the way we think and how we create is extensively different today than it was 6 million years ago. So in addition, as we evolve as humans, so does our culture. Culture also is a powerful human tool for survival because it's constantly changing. So it enhances our quality of life and our overall well-being that we can relish as individual and as part of the community. Moreover, along with the changes comes influences. So the cultural influences have three components. So first would be the material component, followed by the cognitive component. Third or last would be the normative component. So material component pertains to all tangible material that inherited from previous generation. So dati we just use typewriter for everything. For documents, sa offices, pero right now they are considered vintage because we use computers na. Another would be the cognitive component. This pertains to all body of knowledge, skills, and other capabilities handed down from one generation to another. Dati ang basic skill lang na kailangan natin ay marunong kang magbasa, magsulat, dati sa provinces din kailangan pananahi. Yun yung mga basic skills dati. But right now, bukod sa mga nabanggit ko, kailangan na rin marunong tayo sa computer skills, paggamit ng MS, Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. And normative component pertains to the prescription or standard of behavior that govern the relationship of individual in the society. So this standard of behavior is popularly known as the social norm. So sabi natin, standard of behavior that governs the relationship of individual in the society. Example would be pag may kinakasal dito sa Pilipinas. Social norm accepted by the society would be sa side ng babae ang church, reception, and sayawan night before the wedding. So again, let us define social norm. So social norm is the behavior we do in the accordance on what the society has defined as good, right, and important. And almost everyone that is part of that community follows this behavior or rule. For some, conflict arises when a certain rule or behavior is different from what they believe in. And we categorize social norms into two. So we have the formal and the informal social norms. So formal social norm are established written rules. It is made to maintain the balance and order amongst people. So for example, would be the employee manual, laws, college entrance exam, and the no running sign. On the other hand, informal social norms are casual behaviors that are generally and widely conformed to. So we learn this through observation, imitation, and general socialization. Example would be crossing the pedestrian lane even though it is still a red light. Diba, pag tatawid na, kahit na 5 seconds na lang yung intayin mo, yung mga kasabay mo ay tumawid na, ikaw ay gagaya. Kasi nga, we use this as a imitation and this is part of your socialization. Also, leaving your rubbish on the table of the cafe area. Kahit na malaki yung Clego sign natin, kung yung katabi mong table ay nag-iwan lang din ng kalat nila, you will do the same. Formal and informal social norm are further classified as folkways and the mores. So under the folkways, there are direct appropriate behavior, In day-to-day basis and any form of violation does not require reprimanding. Example would be eating with a bare hand during meals may be seen as improper but tolerated in our culture. Di ba nauso din dati yung pagdadala ng mga rice cookers sa fast food chains, sorry. So, tinitingnan sila ng mga tao pero hindi sila nare-reprimand, hindi sila pinapagalitan, hindi sila minumura, hindi din sila pinapalabas ng guard. Simply because it is tolerated. Mores naman are norms that embody the moral views and principle of the society. So that means violating them can lead to a serious consequences. For example, as we all know, abortion is criminalized in the Philippines, as well as catcalling and online harassment, wolf whistling, and included na rin ang cyberbullying. So moving forward, culture exists anywhere human exist, and no two culture are exactly the same. So culture is always evolving. We have new things being invented in a year, month, and even day. And as human, we step up to the game of change. And this is when something new open up, the new way of living, and even new ideas enter the culture. We benefit from these changes and they make our life easy, efficient, and fast moving. Like the introduction of technology to us, the advantages and disadvantages are presented as well. It has helped the world in technological breakthrough. Inventions are made easy, machines are innovated and improved from time to time. But when innovation increases rapidly, napabilis yung pagbabago, it leads to generation gap. And we refer this as a cultural cultural lag, which is the time that elapses between the introduction of new item to the culture and the acceptance of it as part of the new culture. So second mechanism is a diffusion or the cultural borrowing that is defined as the borrowing of one society's cultural trait. In other terms, it's what happens when one society comes into contact with another society and end up adopting it as their own. So while we borrow and adopt other traits, we also can be unaware that we are using it excessively, which is called xenocentrism or the based tendency to value other culture more highly than our own, which can materialize in variety of different ways, such as idolizing, consuming, encouraging other rather than their own. For example, hindi ka na gumagamit ng spoon and fork pag kumakain, nag-chopstick ka na lang, di ba? Hindi ka na rin kumakain ng rice, mga beans stew na lang, tofu stew na lang yung kinakain mo. So, you are very inclined to those culturally biased tendencies ng ibang culture. So, as a dynamic phenomenon, cultures are under constant change and they must adapt to environmental changes. So, this is one of the universal feature of culture. Its attributes and characteristics. So, and that is culture is learned. First is that is culture is learned. Simply because it's not biological or ingrained in our DNA. As children, we just don't inherit culture from our parents. We learn instead and much of this learning that occurs to us even if we don't subconsciously pay any attention to it. We learn our culture not only for our immediate family, but also from institutions, other people relate to, and media exposure. Also, culture is shared because we share our culture with of our group, another members of our group. And the shared nature of culture doesn't mean, however, that culture are the same. Culture is integrated because we have various parts of a culture that are interconnected. And with that, culture is also integrated. All components of culture are connected to one another, and to gain understanding of a culture, one must learn about these different components. Hindi ka pwedeng basta bumasok lang sa isang culture. Pag ganun, makukulture shock ka. So before you take the big step, you take the baby step. Ano ba yung mga pwedeng, ano ba yung mga ginagawa nila na ayaw mo, di ba? Para hindi ka magkaroon ng confusion. Also, culture is dynamic because culture relate with each other. Culture share ideas and symbols that they conform to changes in the environment. Since culture also integrated, it means that if one component of a culture changes, it will affect all the other factors, forcing the entire system to adjust. So, what influence our cultural identity? So, regardless of where we live in, eventually we will have the chance to interact with other culture rather than our own. So, some culture may be accommodating and accepting, and other might be the opposite. It can be intimidating and confusing. So, as mentioned, we can have the state of tolerance to other culture, but it has its limitation, which can lead to the state of culture shock and xenophobia. We have come to the point also that a certain culture is becoming more superior than to our own, and this is what we call the xenocentrism, or the preference for the product, styles, and ideas of someone else's culture rather than one's own. So similarly to colonial mentality. So while the belief that one's culture is relatively superior compared to the culture of another, that is called the ethnocentrism. So this means that they see their own culture as the correct way of living. Other countries lead to war or genocide just to presume that their culture is superior among the others. Diba? While we can relate to other culture, at some point we can be uncomfortable and reject the tradition that may be associated with another group or nationality, which is called the xenophobia. So this can include language, clothing, music, and other traditions. So the discrimination and violence and hostility are also very evident sa xenophobia. Also, the state of culture shock, which is defined by the feeling of uncertainty, confusion, or anxiety that we can experience when visiting, doing business, or living in a society that is completely different from our own can be a bad experience and shocking experience. Kaya magkakaroon ka ng culture shock or ng anxiety towards a certain culture. Also, we have the social processes. Social process of culture, which is defined as an interaction in a group, the adjustment and readjustment and the established relationship and patterns which we gain from that interaction. So the assimilation, acculturation, and amalgamation are referred to as changes due to contact between different culture, but there are notable differences between them. So first, let's define assimilation. Assimilation is the process of social, cultural, and political integration of minority into a dominant culture and society. Example of this is the replacement of bahag as mode of dressing of the Asian Filipinos to Barong Tagalog during Spanish period, and now we have the modern form of dressing. Also, we have the acculturation, which is defined as the transfer of values and custom from one group to another. But take note that this is not necessarily replaced our own. So kahit na magkaroon ka ng transfer ng values and custom from another culture, hindi mo makakalimutan yung sa'yo. Best example is the adaptation of foreign food, but even though we adapt through this foreign food kasi nasa foreign land ka, we still love Filipino dishes. Hindi natin nakakalimutan ng adobo, sinigang, di ba? So, also, we have amalgamation. Amalgamation, rather, refers to two or more culture blending together to create a new, unique culture. Example would be a Filipina marrying a foreigner. So, as we define culture as a collective pattern of behavior and practices known as one, I'm going to leave you the question that what would you choose from yours?